Hello, I'm here to talk to you about some books about unhinged women. Women are dominating the publishing industry and they are producing great books about women who are losing it. I'm looking in this genre for books about women who are specifically reacting to the society that they live in and the oppression that they face and are trying to break out of the confines of femininity in a really feral, strange, unhinged way. That's what I'm hoping to get out of these books. What we have today is a book called Mona. This is about a woman writer, and she goes to Sweden and is like hiding from her past. Then we have Tear by Erica McKeen. This is Canadian fiction. It says something about female rage, and it's about a woman who's stuck in a basement. Then we have this book, The Most, which is about a 1950s housewife who gets into the swimming pool in her apartment complex and refuses to come out. And then finally, we have a book I am reading after getting recommended so many times, Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. This, to my knowledge, is if Otessa Moshfegh's Death in Her Hands was written by someone who is more skilled as a writer. This is about an older woman living in a remote Polish village, and her neighbors start disappearing. It's kind of a murder mystery, but not in the traditional sense. That is what I'm getting up to for this video. I am going to go read Mona, and I'll talk to you about it when I'm done. See you then. Hello, I'm here to talk to you about Mona. This is a story about a woman originally from Peru, but who lives in California, who travels to Sweden after she's been nominated for this very prestigious literary award to take part in their pre-award conference and ceremonies, along with the 12 other nominees. Throughout the book, she is both trying to remember and trying to avoid the memories of something that has happened to her before she left. Other than the last chapter, there really isn't that much to spoil in this book, but I am going to be spoiling what is spoilable. So if you don't want to see that, skip this part. The vast majority of this book is just philosophical musings, and I think that I was absolutely not in the right mood for it at the time, and I was way too stubborn and didn't stop reading it when I should have. I think if I had read this at a different time, maybe not on my country's election day when I was a little bit distracted, I would have liked it a lot more than I did. I didn't love my experience of reading it, though I can see objective quality, but also some issues. So it begins with a little bit of history about who Mona is and how she's got to this point in her life. Like I said, she's originally from Peru, and then her debut novel was like a huge success, so she started teaching at Stanford. And there's some really interesting social commentary here about how much more social value her writing seemed to have once she moved to America and became a woman of color, which is not something that she was in Peru. It's evident in this first chapter that Mona has a drug dependency problem and a desire to escape her life. She's ignoring messages from a man named Antonio. It kind of implies that they're in a romantic relationship, but we never really get any clear history on them until the end of the book. And he is saying things like, you can't escape, you can't just leave. And she is on her way to Sweden. Before she gets on the flight to Sweden, she has this experience where she doesn't remember what has happened to her, but she wakes up on the floor of a train station, which is somewhere where she has gone in the past to imagine her own death, and she's covered in bruises. From what you know about her at this point, it does seem like this could just be some sort of drug-induced blackout, but these bruises make it clear that there was some other party involved. Mostly, she's just trying to hide these bruises throughout the novel and not reflect on what happened. Interestingly, we only really get her perspective on how the bruises look and her trying to like cover up her neck with a headscarf, and not how her body feels when it would obviously be very injured. She gets to Sweden where she meets all of these other writers and we get a little bit more of her personality, but like I said, this book is almost entirely just philosophical musings, no matter who it's from, no matter if we're in Mona's head and it's what she's thinking about, or if it's the perspectives of the other writers, each of which does a talk during this pre-award conference. I think it's important to say here that this book is a piece of satire. It is satirizing academic writing and the way these intellectuals talk to each other, and they are clearly not really rooting what they talk about in reality. It is interesting, but it's a lot of theoretical intellectualizing, and sometimes they do sound absolutely ridiculous. But I think it's very well thought out what everyone's perspective is. While she's here, she keeps seeing this group of men who are like all dressed in black except one dressed in red who leads them and is carrying a staff. It's like some weird cult thing in the forest near the cabins where they're staying. These men aren't part of the conference. The second time that she sees them, they're all huddled around a fox that has its throat slit, and they never engage with anyone other than each other. If you try to engage with them, they just run off into the forest. At one point, she sees them in the lake that they're staying near, and they seem to be immobile in the water with just their heads poking up for air. It's so incredibly strange. There isn't all that much about this weird cult. I think it's really just setting a kind of absurd tone, which helps because the book takes a very strange, surreal shift at the very end of it, and that has kind of set it up to make sense. While she's at this conference, she's having a lot of really strong emotional reactions to kind of random things, and she doesn't even quite know what's going on inside her own interior. She's just feeling a lot. Part of this is taken out on her obsessing over this case back in Peru of a young girl who has gone missing and who turns up dead, and it seems that multiple men were involved in her death. Throughout the story, she's also doing some weird things, especially when she's hit with strong emotions, like just collapsing into the sand and then covering herself in sand, or she's talking to this asshole of a writer and he has a mosquito on his cheek and she slaps him so hard, but it doesn't really stand out to everyone else because everyone around her is an eccentric academic. Like, one of the Nordic men just kind of always has his penis out. At first, it's in the sauna, which kind of makes sense, but then he's just like walking down to the lake in only a sweatshirt and sandals. And it's not really in like an exposing himself kind of way. Inherently, of course, a little bit. It's just weird. He's just a weird guy and he doesn't see anything wrong with it. And it doesn't really make anybody else uncomfortable. She talks to a woman who is like so angry and vindictive for really no reason. I mean, partly because Mona doesn't recognize her and they've met before, but also it's just kind of the way she is. And she expresses the belief that all writing is being trans. It is so strange. Like, it makes sense how she's got to this point. It's not a coherent opinion to have, like, whatsoever. But I think that the author has really thought through and developed very well what these characters are like and why they have come to the conclusions they've come to and why they have these absolutely strange opinions with no bearing in reality, but also are understandable at the same time. So I think I should have reread this last chapter because at the time I read it, I was just not interpreting anything. Like, I just could not. It was in one ear, out the other. It was election night. I was dead tired, but I can't sleep if I'm on the last chapter of a book. So it was more like I was just doing the act of my eyes following the words on the page, but not understanding them at all. That is really my fault, and I cannot blame the book or say that it was hard to grasp or anything like that. I just don't have a huge grasp on it because of the situation I was in. And this book is a little bit difficult to read, and it makes me not feel like I want to read this last chapter again. Like, I just kind of don't care enough. Know that this is not a good way for me to be reviewing this book for you. At the end of the book, there is this surreal thing where it's the award ceremony, which has not felt like something of huge significance, even though that is what we're following throughout the book. It's not supposed to be who's going to win this award, though it carries a $200,000 prize. This book is mostly a vehicle for thought and commentary and not really meant to have like a really strong narrative. So at the award ceremony, there are some weird weather events happening, like this really thick fog rolls in and then the lake that they're in front of starts rising up and becomes this like massive tsunami. And at the same time, Mona is remembering what happened to her, the violent assault that caused these bruises that are all over her body. And this explains in some ways, I mean, it was already pretty clear why she was so obsessed with that Peruvian girl who had gone missing and then been found dead. It seems like their assaults had kind of mirrored each other. And this also tells us who Antonio is. He was someone who is also doing his PhD defense at Stanford. They had gone out together and he was the one who perpetrated this assault. So the book ends with this massive destruction of the entire like literary festival conference that they're at. It is unclear whether or not this has actually happened. I should reread it. I'm sorry that I didn't. I just don't want to. And I'm really trying not to read things that I don't want to read on YouTube because I feel like I'm going to start hating doing this. And I love doing this. So this is not like a fair review of this book because like I don't really know what happened at the end. And it's not the book's fault, but it is a little bit the book's fault. This book has extremely pretentious writing. That writing is supported by the content, by the fact that it's satire, and by the skill. This is really solid writing. It is great at like word choice, sentence level, and it's very intelligent. So it makes sense that it's pretentious. It's not like hard to look at in an embarrassing way because it's pretentious. It's just a little bit dense, and it is like 160 pages, which is part of the reason why I didn't just put it down and try something else and pick it back up when I was more in the mood for it. I am an incredibly stubborn person, and especially with a book that is so small, I feel for some reason like I can't just quit it for now. I don't DNF things. It's like my worst quality as a reader. So while it is small, it definitely doesn't feel as small as it is because of the way that it's written. The way that it's written makes sense. The tone makes sense. It works really well. It's just not easy. While it is written with skill and style, I think that the writing style creates an emotional distance between the reader and the narrator, and that meant that the ending didn't have as much of an emotional impact as I think it could have. But at the same time, I would like to say that this writing is very embodied. It's all so centered in the body. And so the exploration of violence against women felt very meaningful. I felt through this whole book like the author has a really unique and thoughtful and well-developed worldview and knowledge about the things that she covers. I think she exposes you to this wide array of absolutely absurd opinions about obscure topics. It is a very good piece of satire on academia. Like the things these people think are absolutely ridiculous, and they're at the same time supported by clear intelligence and large vocabularies and effective uses of language. It all does make sense theoretically, but then you actually take a step back and think about what these people are saying, just like so frequently happens in academia, and you're like, have you even lived a day in the world? I found it to be extremely critical and layered and deliberate. I thought there was this really funny hypocrisy with Mona starting the book out talking about identity politics and how it has impacted her, and kind of being very critical, kind of condemning it. And then at the same time, she was like utilizing those same identity politics to create an image of each of the writers around her, because it is writers from all over the world. And where these people are from really, really impacted the way that she saw them in a way that she was not critical of at all. While I think this is a strong piece of work, I don't think it has a very strong narrative. I don't think it's a very great story. It has a really interesting first and last chapter. The middle is kind of nothing. If you are interested in like weird philosophical musings, I think that this could be very enjoyable for you, but I didn't feel that there was very much coherence to this story. I wouldn't say this falls into like the no plot, just vibes. I think it's more no plot, no vibes, just thoughts. And that is for some people, and it does what it's doing well. It's not necessarily something that I loved reading, but at the same time, for what it is, there isn't really much more that I wanted from it. I think it's just not really a book for me. Certainly not a book for me to have read yesterday. It just, that did not make sense at all. Today, I am reading Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. Finally, this has probably been recommended to me 200,000 times. I'm about 100 pages in. First 50 pages, I was like, I actually don't know if I'm liking this. It is also kind of filled with philosophical musings, and that was not the vibe yesterday. Not really the vibe today. Now I'm 100 pages in, and I'm getting really into it. I'm enjoying it. So I will update you when I'm done with this with my full thoughts and feelings. I'll see you then. Bye. Hello, I'm here to talk to you about Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. This is a story about an older woman living in a remote Polish village whose neighbors start turning up dead. It's kind of a murder mystery, but in an unconventional way, particularly because of how unconventional this narrator is. I'm going to tell you everything that happens in this, including the ending, which, as this is in some ways a murder mystery, is a huge spoiler. Something that you don't want to know if you read the book. So, if you're gonna read this book, I would skip this part. So this begins with our narrator being woken in the middle of the night by one of her two neighbors that live year-round with her in her neighborhood. This man, she is nicknamed Oddball. He's come to tell her that he has found their other neighbor, who's been nicknamed Bigfoot, dead. They go to his house and they dress him up in a suit. They're trying to be respectful of him. They can't really get a hold of the cops. They're living right on the border between Poland and the Czech Republic, and so the call is going to the wrong place. It's not hugely important for the police to come here. It doesn't seem like there's foul play. It becomes clear pretty quickly that he has choked on a bone of a deer that he had eaten. When they had got to his house, they had actually seen two living deer outside, and then inside were the remains of a deer that he had clearly just roasted. While in his home, our narrator is looking for his ID card because she wants to be able to map out his horoscope. From the start, it's very clear that she's really into horoscopes in a way that is so beyond internet horoscoping and astrology. She's talking about truly the alignment of the planets in far more complexity and absolute insanity than any of the so-called astrologers that you see out there right now. She's really in it. But while she's looking for his ID card, she finds a photograph in a drawer that absolutely shuts her down, fills her with dread and anxiety, and makes her so upset. She just tucks it away in her pocket and she doesn't say anything to her other neighbor about it. It's obvious from the start that this narrator has really strong convictions. Clearly, with the horoscope thing, she's looking for answers and direction outside of herself. She also believes that it can tell you wild things about yourself. Obviously, it's centered around when you're born. She thinks that horoscopes can also tell you the circumstances of your death. She thinks that where the planets are when you die can give information about how you have died. Another way she looks outside of herself is through the weather. She treats it in a kind of similar way as horoscopes. And another way that we see her very strong beliefs is in her beliefs in animal rights. She is a vegetarian. It's not like a preachy vegan sort of thing. She just really doesn't believe in the cruelty that is hunting. And we can see that the town she lives in has really different social conventions than her own feelings. And it's really interesting and well done because she feels reasonable. She doesn't like it, and she files complaints with the police department when a boar is killed out of season. That's against the law. But they have lots of justifications and reasons as to why this could be okay. Maybe it was rabid. Things like that. They clearly don't care nearly as much as she does. And she's really aware of their perception of her as specifically occupying this axis of older and woman. They think that she's crazy. And she knows this 100%. I like the way that this book somehow strikes a balance where we can see her as being a little bit removed from reality or science, but we can also see her as being, on some topics, more reasonable than the people around her. Like I said, she only has two neighbors that live year-round. It's currently winter. One of them has died, so it's just her and the one other neighbor. They're not close to each other. She is very isolated in this neighborhood that is quite separate from the closest town. The only person that really comes to visit her is her former student named Dizzy. They are translating William Blake poems into Polish together, and he comes up once a week for dinner. One of the times that he comes up, they see something weird in the forest as he's leaving, and they go to investigate, and when they do, they find the body of the police commandant, who is Dizzy's boss. He works for the police station in some capacity. He's not like a cop. The police commandant has fallen into an out-of-use well, and they can see that there are deer footprints all around. And the lead character, whose name is Janina, but she hates that name, so I'm just going to keep calling her the protagonist, the narrator, or whatever, she thinks this must be a series of murders that are righteously being perpetrated by the animals around us as some sort of revenge. This police commandant is one of the hunters that she has tried to physically stop from hunting. She is so against the killing of animals and cruelty towards animals. That is part of the reason why she had a really negative relationship with the neighbor who died, Bigfoot. He was very cruel towards his dog. He also set up really inhumane traps that she would often take down. She was complaining about him all the time, and she was complaining about him to this police commandant, who she could see saw her as just a madwoman. So after a lot of her philosophical musings and her thinking about horoscopes and her visiting town and taking care of the place. Like, she takes care of the summer people's homes. She hears a rumor that one of the richest people who lives in her neighborhood during the summer months has gone missing. There's rumors of some sort of mafia connections, and that both of the dead were also connected to this man and to his illegal smuggling. Pretty soon after hearing these rumors, she meets an entomologist in the woods named Boris. She's at first very suspicious and cautious about him, but then he comes to stay with her, and they become really good friends and actually develop like a sort of relationship. It doesn't get into the details of it. It's really sweet, actually, because she can be very frustrated with the people around her. She can also be kind of really judgmental, like saying that someone has a bad vibe right when she sees them. And it sometimes feels like she hates humanity as a whole because of the way that they treat animals. But then we also see her relationships with Dizzy, with Boris, with a woman who works at the vintage shop in town, and a developing relationship with Oddball, and we can see that she really does value human connection. Boris tells her about this specific beetle that he is studying. He tells her about the pheromones that he has and about how, I think, logging is ruining the beetle's habitat and causing it to become endangered. And she is very righteously angry at this. She cares about all animals, bugs included. While Boris is staying with her, the rich neighbor that was rumored to have disappeared himself is found dead in the forest. He has clearly been here for many months. Like, it seems he was killed pretty quickly after the police commandant. They go at night. I think all of the friends that I mentioned, they're kind of becoming a little group together, and Boris checks out the crime scene and places his death. This is how they know that he's died long before they have found him. Her and her neighbor Oddball are getting closer and closer in a way that's just very nice to see. At this point, Boris has left back to the university where he works at, and Oddball invites her to the Mushroom Pickers Ball. He's part of the Mushroom Pickers Society. He's like such a strange little man, and he's wonderful. So they have to dress up in costume together. Her friend at the vintage shop helps them create these costumes, and she dresses up as a wolf, and then he dresses up as Little Red Riding Hood. While they are at the Mushroom Pickers Ball, she strikes up a conversation with the president of the Mushroom Pickers Society's wife, who opens up to her about how she feels like she doesn't even know her husband because of how cruel his hunting is. Like, he'll bring home a deer and throw it across the table, and he's just so indifferent towards the suffering of this animal and the gore and the depravity that is hunting and killing and processing animals. But she has just seen through it, and she gets really upset. So upset that she says, actually, I really want to go home early, but I have to stay because he's the president. He's got to stay till the end of the ball. And the narrator says, you go home, I'll give him a ride. And you know, because she is dressed up as a wolf, and she's just been told in detail how cruel this man is to animals for his own selfish purposes, you know exactly what is going to happen. And it doesn't get into any detail. It skips over, like, all of it. It skips over her even giving him a ride. It just says news of the president's death is spread throughout the town by the following day. One of the very final things to happen in this book is that she goes to this mass held in the town where they're honoring the saint of hunting. I don't know jack shit about religion, so I'm not going to try to explain exactly what's happening. There's this monologue that the priest does that is very interesting, because somehow the saint of hunting has gone from this story where this man, like, is about to kill a deer. He's like a big hunter. He's about to kill a deer, and then he realizes it's God. And for some reason, he has been turned into the saint of hunting, even though this experience turned him into someone who didn't hunt anymore. And they just, like, don't see that at all. They don't see the irony. They're talking about taking things from animals. They're really getting into the selfishness of it, and it's seen as valuable in this mass. She is there, and she causes a huge scene, as you know she's going to once it starts. And she ends up being fired from her job, and then she thinks that she knows what she has to do, and she has all the tools for it in her car. Then it cuts to her at her house with her friends, and they are about to be served soup when one of them, I think Oddball, looks outside down onto the town, and he says there's a huge fire. And all of them already know that this is a fire that she has set. Dizzy gets a call from the police station where they say the priest is dead and there's a fire, you got to get here as fast as you can. And then this is where she confesses to everything, all of the murders. Not the first one. The first one, Bigfoot did actually just choke on a bone, and she found in his drawer a photograph that was all of the hunters in the town doing their little hunting thing, and they're posing in front of a whole bunch of dead animals, including in the corner her two dogs that had gone missing. This is something that has been mentioned throughout the book. It begins with her referencing them as her little girls, and it's kind of unclear, like deliberately unclear, if they are animals or daughters. Then you understand that she had dogs and that these dogs were her entire world. They were so important to her. She did consider them like daughters. She really opens up about this to the wife of the president when they are speaking to each other about animal cruelty and animal rights. And she says that she spent months looking for them and like hanging up posters, and her students who she teaches English to, they asked all around town if anyone had seen her dogs, and she always had the inkling of an idea that the hunters probably killed them, maybe by accident. She's often saying they shoot at anything that moves. This makes it very clear, this photograph, that they did it and they were proud of it. They posed the dogs and posed in front of them. So this photograph is her motivation, but she sees herself as just a tool that is acting on behalf of the animals who are the ones that are taking revenge. The book ends with her managing to escape the police with the help of her friends and going to live with the entomologist Boris. What I think is really interesting about this confession that she has is that she has taken advantage of her invisibility as an older woman, taken advantage of the fact that she knows that everyone sees her as crazy but also as harmless, and she uses that to kill them. What I don't love about this confession is its existence at all. I think that the author had the skill required to make this confession unnecessary and leave it a little bit more ambiguous. I loved the ambiguity, but also the very strong knowledge that she, dressed in this wolf costume, had killed the president of the Mushroom Picking Society. And I think she could have done that through some other kind of revealing instead of just a really straightforward confession. I think that it weakened the work as the end thing, the big twist. It's all laid out so perfectly for you exactly what happened. And I know that's tricky. I know that there is a way that this was ambiguous and then it was really unsatisfying. But I think it just kind of handed it to me way too cleanly. I just really felt like this book had the potential, this writing had the potential to do a kind of ambiguous where you're certain that she was involved, but it's not as explicit kind of ending. So starting out reading this book, like I said, the first 50 pages, I was not sure if I was into it. There's a lot of horoscope talk in this book, and while it works for the character and shows us how obsessed she is, it can be tough to get through. I don't really give a fuck about horoscopes. I don't really give a fuck about the alignment of the planets, and I don't think it gave me all that much information. I think it was always giving me the same information about her. I know the repetition was necessary. It was just a little bit tough to get through. I think I hadn't really grasped the voice, and I hadn't really found myself caring about the characters by the first 50 pages, and then by 100 pages, I was so deep into this. I ended up loving the voice and loving these characters once I actually let myself get into it. I loved the developing relationships between the characters and their dynamics. I loved how weird the narrator was, and I actually ended up really enjoying being in her head and seeing the things that she thought and then how she expressed them to others. Another thing that I changed my mind on when I started reading this, well, to be fair, at the beginning of this book, it's overused a lot. There's this capitalization thing where absolutely everything is a proper noun. It kind of peters out, which thank God, because it was a little bit tiring. I realized that this is a reference to William Blake's poetry, which is what her and Dizzy are translating together, and that made me like it a little bit more. I still think it was overused at the beginning, and it was hard to look past, because at the time I thought it was just her voice, and I was like, damn, girl. Okay, anger with a capital A, animals with a capital A, like I get it. But I don't remember in the last like 200 pages of this book ever thinking about it again. I thought this had a lot of really interesting balances. Like the narrator is very practical and very no nonsense, while also holding some kind of out there beliefs and convictions. I liked the balance that it struck, like I said, with community, with her seeming like she has a disdain for humanity, but then not actually generalizing it to all of humanity. It wasn't a thing of like, I hate everyone, but I love my friends. It did feel like she felt that human beings had the potential for goodness, and she had the potential to love other people. But it was so heavily based in how they treated animals. And I thought that that was absolutely great. I liked this isolated setting. And then as the book moves on, she has more and more relationships that are more and more meaningful in her life. It was great. At the end of the day, I think this was a really fun mystery novel that I actually cared about. I cared about the story, and I cared about the characters and their relationships. And I understand why people like it so much. It wasn't the best thing I had ever read, but I totally get all of the recommendations. I think it could have been so much better if the ending was a little bit different. I am at this point at part 2 of either Tear or Tear by Erica McKeen. I think it's Tear, and I'm going with Tear. And I can tell you that Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead is my favorite so far. I am not liking this at all. Why don't I just tell you about the first 270 pages now, and then, 170 pages now, and then I'll give you another update when I'm done. So Tara follows a woman named Frances who is living in the basement of her student housing, and she gets locked in there. And then we get her kind of starving to death and absolutely losing her grip on reality, mixed with a whole bunch of her childhood memories. Now I'm going to get into some spoilers, even though I don't have money because I'm only halfway through the book. But if you want to read this book that is, I'll tell you right now, not that great, skip this part. So it's pretty hard to give you any kind of summary of this book because the narrative in the present is a lot of repetition and nothing is really happening. So I think I'm just really going to tell you about what we know about Frances through her childhood memories. One of the first things we get to know about her is that she is the result of her father being a 27-year-old TA taking advantage of her mom at 18 years old in her very first semester of university. Her mom, of course, had to drop out of university and was absolutely miserable, and for her first 6 years, Frances grew up in her grandparents' house. And while she didn't know her father at this time, he was not in the picture at all, we do get a little bit of information about his story. He was born in Germany, and then his family moved over to the United States for his dad's job. And once his dad made it big and got a whole bunch of money, he left her father's mom, and him and his mom moved back to Germany. And this is showing us a theme of unfairness in womanhood and in motherhood, because this mother, her dad, Peter's mom, she had to raise her son. She had to be the mom who was making him go to school, and then he got to spend summers at his wealthy father's house in America where everything was luxury, and she really got the shit end of the deal there because he started to resent her and want to stay with him. Once Frances is going into the first grade, her father appears back in her life, and her and her mom move in with him into a townhouse. She has to change schools, and in this townhouse complex, she meets this boy Jasper, and they become very good friends. And Jasper tells her right away, I thought I had imagined you. Like, I thought I dreamed you up. Are you even real? I had been imagining a girl that looked exactly like you because there are no kids to play with in this neighborhood, and now here you are. She has plenty of memories of playing hide and seek with Jasper for hours on end, and then she has this one memory of her being unable to find him and him not coming out when she called his name. And she finally goes over to his house, and she's expecting him to open the door, and who opens the door is a man she's never seen before. Jasper lives with just his single mom and has mentioned very briefly that his dad isn't allowed to come over anymore, and it is his dad standing there. And she says, is Jasper here? He says, he's upstairs. She goes upstairs, and he's like sitting on the ground, rocking back and forth. Everything is told through a child's perspective, so we get what she sees, but we don't really get the comprehension of what's happening. There's another memory that she has of her mom maybe trying to drown her. This, again, isn't a thought that she has because she's not understanding what's happening. She's just telling it all very plainly without any interpretation. She's gone to the beach with her mom, and she dropped her seashells in the water, and her mom says, go and get them. You don't need to be afraid of getting wet. And her mom keeps pushing her to go farther and farther and farther into the water. At this memory, she's like 4. She has no idea how to swim, and she gets sucked under, and she just like lets herself go, and her mom does end up pulling her out. She remembers going to her new school and feeling so alone and asking her teacher if Jasper was going to be there. On her very first day, she's sitting in the classroom before everyone else has come in, and her teacher says, he's a bad boy. And she ends up asking Jasper about this, saying, why would she say that? And he tells her the story of how before his dad was told to never come back, he had gifted him a BB gun, which Jasper took to school and pretended was real. In kindergarten, mind you. He then pointed the BB gun at the teacher, thinking that it would be funny, and she hid under the desk and she peed her pants. And everyone in the class thought it was real, and they were all really, really scared. And he clearly has a lot of regret about this and doesn't like the way that he is seen by the teachers in the school and by his classmates, though he's seen better than how she is seen, which is as not real. Because when she moved into the townhouse, Jasper had told his friends from school that there was this imaginary friend that had shown up, and so they all kind of pick on her, telling her that she isn't real, until finally, weeks after school starts, one of them pokes her and says she's real, and she's like flooded with relief. When she's about 10, her dad decides that he is going to do a quick stint teaching university in Germany, and then he never comes home, and she stops eating altogether and kind of just like gives up on life. And she thinks to herself, I'm not real. Then her mom tells her that her dad is dead, and she knows that this is a lie, but it causes her to start eating again and to start being a person again, actively participating in her life. We get far less details about her years after Jasper has moved away, when they're like 10 or 11, near when her dad has left. Most of the details are the few years that she is in school with Jasper and living in the house with her mom and her dad. We know that her and her mom fight a lot, that her mom is a really difficult person, is clearly a really depressed person. I think this could have been a little bit more interesting with how it portrayed the dynamic between Frances and her mother, particularly when Frances is a teenager, because her mom was a teen parent and her mom was so young. As someone with a very young mom, I think there's a specific way that that shows up in the mother-child relationship, and I don't think that that was reflected in this book. I kind of think that this book is just trying to say something about, like, female rage. I think it says that on the back, like, that's part of the marketing here. I think that part of that is having her mom having been taken advantage of by this man, and then it feels like the author kind of forgot that her mom was 18. So while we're getting all of these memories, we are also, every so often, interjected with the present narrative, where Frances has been locked in the basement that she lives in. But it's very unclear whether or not she is actually locked in here. From the jump, we know that she's losing it. We know that she doesn't know what is real and what isn't. It will say over and over again she tried the knob, or did she? She thought she tried the knob, but maybe she didn't. There is a mindless repetition in this book that is in some ways trying to convey desperation, but totally fails. It's such a cheap way of doing that, and it just makes it really grating to read. I'll give you an example of this fucking repetition. Frances remembered that night, but she remembered it as if it were a dream. She thought it had been a dream. It was a dream. It must have been a dream. And all the colors in the dream were gray. So many of the paragraphs of her stuck in the basement are told like that. Honestly, this book could have been maybe 2/3 of the size that it is right now if that had been cut. I don't think it's doing anything. I think it's just making it annoying to read. So here in the basement, it's unclear if she's really locked in here. It's also unclear how much time is passing. She has a little window at the top of her bedroom, and there's not any change in day. It's always the night. It's always very dark in this basement. She also has no food down here. At one point, she starts drinking vinegar and eating the pages out of a book. And this whole time, she's hearing this scratching and tapping behind the wall that should just lead to the ground. And it is driving her absolutely insane, more even than the hunger is. At the end of part 1, she opens up the wall with a bread knife, and a creature crawls out of there. It's like, just kind of like, it keeps describing it as like a plane of white skin. Like, it has no eyes and no mouth and no nose. This is a reference to a story that her grandfather told her when she was a little kid. It doesn't really matter, but there is some sort of meaning here in the appearance of this monster. And the monster takes the knife and opens its own mouth up, opens its nose up, opens its eyes and its ears, and then is standing there in front of her. And part 1 ends. So at this point, it's feeling pretty incoherent. We're getting some seemingly not that important childhood memories. They are setting a kind of disquieting tone, but they're doing so through just like a lot of words, a lot of seemingly unnecessary words. I think this book could have been a lot shorter. At least part one definitely could have. What I noticed and what I need to say about this book so far is that I, okay, I think Erica McKean has a foot fetish. That's a crazy accusation, and I understand that, but I don't think a page has gone by where the bare feet of the character, of her as an adult and also her as a child, has not been described. It's absurd the degree to which this barefoot thing happens. At some point, it seems like it's trying to say something about like containment and like social expectations, because she spends all of her summers at her grandparents' house barefoot, and then she goes to school and she needs shoes, and it's like she's confined by these shoes. But then why is it all like everything, every single time we get any sort of like embodied description of Frances, there's got to be a little comment about toes. There are similes in here that are about toes. There are a lot, actually. The similes are driving me fucking nuts, because I think they're trying so hard not to be cliche that they go all the way into absurd territory, and then they become irritating in that sense. Like, I'll find you an example. Okay, actually, this example is annoying for two reasons. So first, I'll read you out this fucking simile. Her hair was wild against the pillowcase, like a cluster of softened corkscrews. That's stupid. Like, I'd rather it be cliche, honestly. The thing that's annoying about that is that that is a journal entry that she's reading that her father had written. And this is so evident of a writer that is not very skilled, of a novel that is likely a debut. I don't know, but I am guessing that this has that debut feeling, because then the author's voice, not even the narrator's voice, is so strong that it overrides everything. It switches into this journal, and it's written in the exact same way as the rest of the book, and it's jarring. It's jarring to see a journal that is written like a book, and that is written like the book that you are reading. It needed to actually feel like a journal to be impactful in any way, and to make any kind of sense to include, and it just didn't. Who writes that in their journal? Her hair was like a cluster of softened corkscrews, not only like a terrible simile, but also so ridiculous, as if that would be something that someone would ever write. I hated it. He's not like a writer. Like, her father, I don't know what he does. I think he's like a fucking psychology professor. He's not writing like that in his journals. I'm sorry, no. Another thing that I'm really not vibing with in regards to the voice and the style is that there are all these very detailed descriptions that are not actually descriptive or informative or evocative. It's like the first chapter is just explaining the street that her house is on and the way her house looks. And it's like, I don't care. Like, I just could not care less. It will give you these detailed rundowns of things that mean nothing and they don't add anything to the text. They don't add anything to your reading experience. It's just something that you have to get through to get to the parts that actually are important. And that's annoying. I think part of that, particularly with the first chapter, is because this is something that I've noticed as a Canadian who often reads Canadian writers' works. Sometimes a book will be, again, I'm guessing, a debut, and it will be written with the help from a grant from the Canadian Council of the Arts. And I think that those books specifically try way too hard to overemphasize their location in Canada. Like, this book tells you over and over again that it is taking place in London, Ontario. It feels like it needs to justify itself as a work of Canadian fiction for like the purposes of the grant that it's received, and it weakens the work in so many ways because it's not actually meaningfully Canadian. It is just taking place in a city in Canada. I just really don't feel that the Canadianness of it is incorporated in a way that feels natural or meaningful or well done, and it is annoying. I think a lot of this book is really annoying, and I honestly don't know why I keep reading it. There must be something that is keeping me going through this. I do feel that there is a way that this could be like clever at the end, and it could kind of like bring it all home for me. It could gain a coherence. I think it has the potential to be okay. No matter what it does, I'm not a fan of this writing style, but someone else out there might be. So I think that's why I haven't put it down. I'm not absolutely hating it. It is not my favorite book I've ever read, though. I will update you with the rest of what happens in here and my final thoughts on it later. See you then. Bye. Hello, I'm here to talk to you about the second half of Terror by Erica McKeen. Mostly, I'm just going to talk to you about what happens in it and a little bit of my thoughts, but everything that I already said about this book, it just got worse in the second half. For a little bit, it does get intriguing in part 2. So I'm going to talk about that now. If you don't want to know, skip this. Part 2 opens with Frances's roommate deciding to go down into the basement because she needs to do her laundry. And she's thinking about how she's kind of been avoiding going into the basement because she doesn't really want to see Frances. And the language that her mind keeps using is encounter Frances. She keeps trying to correct it. She keeps thinking to herself like she's way too mean about Frances in her head. She's just kind of an unnerving person, but there's not really any reason for that. And her roommate, Kai, knows that she's being unfair. When she finally builds up the courage to go down into the basement, she opens the door, flicks on the light, and at the bottom of the stairs, she finds Frances's dead body. She has been lying there dead for at least 5 days. She's died of a heart attack brought on by malnutrition. She was never locked in the basement, and I think that it does become pretty clear in Frances's part that she's not really locked in the basement. The last time her roommate Kai had seen Frances was about a week before, so probably 2 days before her death. And she had a really weird encounter with her in the kitchen where Frances wasn't really responding to anything that Kai said. It seemed like she was actually sleepwalking. And Frances has a dream that is actually a memory of this happening. You think when you hear Frances's part that she's just made it up, but Kai's perspective makes it clear that Frances did actually leave the basement. It wasn't just a dream. So we get some chapters from the roommate's point of view. There's 3 of them. There's Kai, there's Katie, and Reese. So Kai and Reese are really affected by Frances's death. None of these women were very close with her. They were all friends, and she was just the extra who lived in the basement. Katie is putting on a really brave face that actually seems real. She kind of feels like a really cold person. We don't really get much from any of them. Mostly we get to hear from Kai because she is the one who found Frances's body. They are profoundly affected by having lived above a dead body of a girl that they knew for at least 5 days. Kai's really caught up on the idea of Frances's body. She goes to the funeral and she asks, where is the body? And Frances has been cremated. And she just keeps thinking about, I wonder where the body is, even once she knows that she's been cremated. At the funeral, Frances's mom, Jeanette, freaks out at all 3 of the girls. She starts screaming at them, telling them that they're so disrespectful for being there and that she hates them and she doesn't even want to look at them. How could they have let her daughter die? How could they have let her sit there for 5 days? When the 3 roommates go to the house together to pack it up, they haven't been there for a few days because their roommate was literally found dead. Who would want to be in that house? Kai hears some movement in the closet downstairs in Frances's room, but she doesn't remember that she's heard this until later that night. And she ends up going back to the house. And here at the house, she goes into Frances's room in the basement and she sees Frances, but it's not quite Frances. It is wearing her clothes. It's a monster, rotting version of her. And this is the thing that crawled out of the basement and supposedly killed Frances, but clearly just kind of scared her to death. The monster chases Kai out of the house, and then we begin part 3, which all takes place from its perspective. It is slowly becoming Frances. It's slowly gaining her memories, it's slowly learning how to be a human, and it's slowly looking more and more like her and less uncanny monster-like. It doesn't know how to walk properly. It has a very unsettling appearance to everyone that sees it. And it goes out of the house and it kind of stumbles across the road. Movements are all jerky and almost gets hit by a car. And some people try to help it, and one of them holds his hand down to help the monster, and it grabs his arm and just easily slips it out of the joint, and then it runs away. The next people that the monster stumbles across are a group of men drinking in the park, and they're kind of jeering at her and being disgusting drunk men. And one of them, she has not said anything to them, to be clear, and one of them takes her into the forest and starts to try to assault her, and she does rip his penis off. Then the monster goes and visits Frances's mom, who wants to believe that this is her daughter, tucks her into bed, and she starts calling everyone saying Frances isn't dead, she's here. Her ex-husband shows up, Frances's father, and he says, I'm taking you to the hospital. You can't call me in the middle of the night and tell me that Frances is alive. But then he hears movement upstairs in his daughter's room. And he goes up there and he sees as the monster slips out of the window. And he just, in real time, rewrites his own memory of what has happened. Then the monster finds Jasper, her childhood friend, and we get a little bit of Jasper's perspective and some memories of what has happened to him since moving away from the town where he grew up with Frances. He has had some pretty terrible sexual encounters, some being perpetrated against him. His first one being one of his friends drunk at a party has totally taken advantage of him, and he ends up beating the friend, breaking his nose, and then the next day, his only two friends, one of them being the guy who tried to assault him, beat him almost to death. Then the second one being him as the perpetrator, his first sexual experience with a girl in college, and him hurting her, and him having a memory of it that is not accurate to the assault that it was. So Jasper stumbles across what he thinks is a homeless woman in the park, but is actually this monster that is looking more and more like Frances. The monster is covering her face with her hair, and so he doesn't recognize her as Frances. He knows what she looks like because they were friends on Facebook. He also went to the funeral and saw recent photos of her, but he doesn't know that this is some kind of simulacrum of Frances. So Jasper ends up convincing the monster to come back to his apartment, and it's clear that his desire is just for sex. They get close to each other, and he smells this rotting scent on her, and yet still he's like, I want to have sex with this woman. He also notices that she hasn't said a word. He thinks maybe she's disabled, and I think is in some ways aware of her vulnerability and the fact that he's taking advantage of that, but he's totally blinded by his desire to have sex. They kiss, and when he puts his tongue into her mouth, he pulls up clumps of hair and clumps of dirt, and he starts spitting it out, of course, and reels back, and the monster looks up and he sees that it's Frances's face or something close to her face, and the monster ends up killing him, ripping his fucking body to shreds, and then falls asleep in his apartment, wakes up the next day, and is almost a perfect replica of Frances at this point, and the book ends with her escaping with a box of Frances's documents and passports and stuff that she had stolen when she went and visited Jeanette. So this book never really comes together to mean anything or be anything or say anything. I get that it's trying to be feminist. I get that it has this marketing that it's female rage of some sort or some empowering story. I don't think it did any of that well. I also don't think it did the horror aspect well. It just wasn't effective at all in anything that it was doing. And that, in a large way, is because the writing just is not that good. At the most basic level, it has this really serious tone, but it's not supported by very good writing. It's not descriptive in any way. It's not evocative. It's just details. I saw someone on Goodreads describe this as being like a story that Colin from Dairy Girls had written. It just drags on and on and on. It gets so bogged down in the details, and they're not adding anything. There's also the repetition that I've really hated that I mentioned. I feel like this book had so much weighing it down, and then at the end of the day, it didn't have a coherent story. What was it even weighing down? Was there anything besides this random specificity and this absolutely meaningless repetition? It's not that long of a book, but it feels like such a drag to get through. You are sitting through all of these childhood memories, some of which, of course, have significance, but most of which could be removed from the story and there would be no impact whatsoever. No impact on your understanding, no impact on how the tone is set. A lot of them are either serving no purpose or the same purpose as other stories. And I don't think that Erica McKeen is a great horror writer, so the stories that she's put in just to set a horrific, dark tone don't really do anything for me. I thought that the most interesting perspectives were from the roommates, and it totally dropped those almost immediately. We got a few chapters, and then it quickly switches to part 3, which is a very empty creature feature. I can get down with a creature feature. I don't think this did it well at all. And as soon as it was clear that we were going to follow the monster's perspective for part 3, I was like, fuck. A monster trying out being human? Of course, this is going to rely even more heavily on detail. And oh my god, did it ever. I think I also really hated this part 3 because I have just read Walking Practice by Dolky Min, I think his name is, and it was amazing. It was a really great story about an alien like molding its body into a human. This did not come anywhere near that book. And the specificity of place that I was talking about before, this whole thing of like, this is a Canadian book. Look, it's set in London, Ontario. Look, we're on Fort Crescent. Like, so tiring. I have an example of that also kind of shows you how detailed this book was with the monster's perspective. Okay, listen to how exhausting this is to read. Ford Crescent stretched out like a gray elastic band from the point on the left where it began to the point on the right where it bent out of the eye and into the temple, curving away from the entrance to University Heights Elementary School before disappearing behind another property on the corner, a cluster of trees sticking up like fingers from the lawn. The monster didn't know where the road went after it turned the corner. It didn't know that the school at the turn in the road was called University Heights, that it was named after this particular grouping of houses and streets that swooped in long crescents and avenues tucked between Sarnia Road and Oxford Street, Western and Wonderland. It didn't know that this neighborhood was named University Heights because of the university sprawled just a few blocks away, or that it was nestled within the larger neighborhood of Medway, named after that larger Medway in England. It didn't know that this was all a part of London, named also after that larger London. Exhausting. Are you joking? Why did we have to go for a page just naming streets in London, Ontario? I don't care. I don't think you needed to prove to the Canada Council for the Arts that this book was Canadian. You are a Canadian writer writing in Canada. All it needed to be was set in Canada. This is way too much. At the end of the day, Terror by Erica McKeen didn't feel like it was telling a story. It felt scattered and jumbled and messy. It felt like it was mostly filler and that it didn't really have anything to say, certainly at the very least, not anything new to say. And I am being so incredibly hateful about this book. I feel a little bit less hate for The Most by Jessica Anthony, which I have read. I don't feel awesome about this one either. I didn't mean for this video to be me being like pretty fucking negative, but unfortunately I am going to be yet again. So the issue with The Most is that the synopsis makes it seem like a far more interesting book than it's going to be. This book would like you to think that it is about a 50s housewife who decides to get into her apartment complex's pool one day and refuses to get out. That sounds awesome. That sounds right up my alley. This is also very short, so I can put up with the kind of historical fiction 50s setting that I wouldn't normally like. This is not really about that at all. This is actually about a marriage, her marriage with her husband, and their infidelity. I'm going to tell you what happens in this book pretty briefly, so if you still are interested in reading it, if you're into like character studies, marriage studies, you would probably like this. It is very readable. It's not poorly written like Terror was. It's not awesome though. That's not fair. It really wasn't my taste, and I think that the synopsis sets itself out to be something that is my taste, and I feel a little bit tricked by it. I also don't think that the whole thing of it's a woman who gets into a pool and refuses to get out, that is not a central focus, and so this doesn't feel like it actually fits into the whole unhinged woman kind of book thing. So we are sort of ending on one that makes no sense to be in this video. I'm not taking fault for that. You would think that this would fit, right? So the book begins with Kathleen Beckett telling her husband, Virgil Beckett, to take the boys to church on a Sunday because she's feeling unwell. He leaves, and she gets up, throws up because she's 8 weeks pregnant and nobody knows, and then gets into the apartment complex's pool. This is going back and forth between Kathleen and Virgil's perspective. So actually the first perspective we get is Virgil's. He takes the kids to church, he comes home, and he's thinking, damn, I want to go golf with the boys because it's like a beautiful November day. They have recently moved from Rhode Island to Delaware, and he is working at a new job and he wants to go golfing with the boys at his new job. And so when he returns and she's in the pool, weirdly, because while it's hot, it is November and they've never seen anybody use this apartment pool, he is irritated because he wants her to do her wifely motherly duties so that he can go have fun with his friends. He does end up leaving their 2 children just hanging out in the apartment complex. It was the 50s. He doesn't have any qualms about doing this, really. And he thinks, of course, she'll be out of the pool when I get back from golfing. We come to learn from his perspective that he has pretty recently kind of tried to turn his life around. In Rhode Island, he had been drinking a lot with the boys from work. And at the bar that they would go to, he would have this affair with the waitress. And he started falling for this woman, and it got pretty serious, and so he decided to smarten up, and he decided to move the family to Delaware. We learn about Kathleen that as a college student, she was very, very good at tennis, and that she kind of gave up the life of a pro athlete. This is interesting because we get to see it from both their perspectives. For Virgil, this is just a little blip. It was something that she could have done, but then didn't, and now here she is, his wife. For her, tennis was her entire life. Her entire life in a lot of different ways. I mean, she was at a professional level. She was very, very good, very talented, very disciplined in her practicing. It took up a lot of her life. And she also had an affair that started just as a relationship with her tennis coach as a teenager. He was 21 and she was 16. The book doesn't get into that. I don't think it would have made all that much sense to get into that because it is set in the 50s. And I understand that at the time that was more acceptable. It is a bit gross. It's extremely gross. It's beyond gross, not a bit. So she'd had this relationship with her coach, Billy. It is heavily implied that she had an abortion of Billy's baby, and then she left him when she went to college. They kept in touch a little bit. It's kind of like, he's the one that got away, my long lost love kind of thing. And she decided to marry Virgil because it seemed like an easier marriage, and because she was trying to be someone who she wasn't when she decided on Virgil. A little bit after they got married, Billy came to visit her. She asked him to come and visit her. They had their little affair, and she became pregnant with what Virgil thinks is his firstborn child. Her father-in-law, Virgil's dad, has always believed that this firstborn Nathaniel is not Virgil's baby, and the last time that they visited him, she caught him taking Nathaniel's blood to get it tested. The morning before she gets into the pool, she gets a call, 2 calls actually, one from Virgil's dad, and she knows that he is calling to tell Virgil that the blood tests have come back and that Nathaniel is not his son. Don't really know how she knows that, but whatever. The second is from the waitress, who asks for the nickname that she calls Virgil, Charlie, and asks him if he got it. She has no reason to know any of what either of these phone calls are going to be about, and yet somehow she does. From Virgil's perspective, we learn that he's really into jazz, and that he decided that he wanted to play the saxophone because he was so into jazz. He never actually even picked up a saxophone. He was just like, he got sent to World War II. He never actually saw a single day of battle. It was like one battle that never really materialized. So he kind of just like had a little jaunt around Europe and decided while he was in Europe, I'm going to go home, I'm going to go to university, I'm going to study how to play the sax. Never actually did it, but he did tell this dream to the woman that he cheated with, and she has sent him to his work a saxophone. I do like how it's kind of contrasting the 2 dreams that Virgil and Kathleen have had, because Virgil's just idea of himself as someone that could play the saxophone is so incredibly different from the reality that Kathleen was a very talented tennis player who could have done huge things in the world of tennis. It kind of reminds me of that stereotype of men who are like, I had an injury in high school, but I was gonna go to the Olympics, or like I was gonna be a professional football player, and it's like, I don't think you were. I actually don't think that you dislocating your knee that one time, I don't think that's the reason that you didn't become a professional football player. So when Virgil gets home from golfing with the boys, he's like, wow, that's weird. My wife is still in the pool. He really mostly just thinks, well, what are we going to do for dinner then? But when he goes to talk to her, she says, hey, your dad called. You should call him back. He goes up, calls his dad back. His dad says, Nathaniel is not your son. He believes it, but also doesn't really believe it. Like, some core part of him kind of knows that it's true, but he also thinks that his dad is kind of a nut. We learn from Kathleen's perspective that she has actually had a second affair, this being with the landlord. It is for unclear reasons. She's not attracted to him. She just goes over one time to talk to him, and he's crying, and she just like takes off her dress, and he is the father of the baby that she's currently pregnant with. When Virgil decides to finally like really try and coax his wife out of the pool because he wants dinner, he gets down there and the landlord is sitting a little bit too close to her, and he thinks, I'm really suspicious of that. But he also thinks, of course there's no way, like I can't even entertain the thought. She calls him the little troll. She would never have an affair with this man. The landlord gets up and leaves, and they finally have a conversation where Kathleen confronts him about the phone call from his affair partner. And she says, what did you get? And he's trying to come up with the words, a saxophone, to come clean. And she knows that he's had an affair, and she's thinking, I'll come clean about my affairs as long as he does it first. And then maybe we can forgive each other. That's how the book ends. We don't know if either of them actually ends up doing it. It doesn't wrap up in any sort of interesting way. And I also don't think there's all that cohesive of a narrative here. It's kind of just like, we learn this and then we learn that and then we learn that. So my biggest issue with this book is that it isn't about what it said it was going to be about, and I was anticipating something very different than what I got. The pool thing is not central at all, and the reason why she's in the pool is also not central at all, and the book doesn't even make you that curious about it. What this is about is the infidelity of this married couple, and I didn't care to read about that. I think this was also missing a sense of time and place. This is set in a very specific time and place, and I didn't really feel that. I don't think that it ever evoked its own setting. It's trying to say Sputnik 2 just got launched into space. It's trying to tell you we're in Delaware. We're at these apartments in Delaware. I didn't feel anything. Like, I didn't even really feel this unseasonably warm day that they were having. It was nothing. That's really the end of the story on this book. I will never think about it again. I think it was really forgettable. I don't think it was terrible. I don't think it was poorly written. I think it needs to be marketed in a different way, and it's not something that I care about. I feel like it wasn't a huge waste of time, but I definitely could have been reading something more what I want to read. And what I want to read is not really a heterosexual domestic character study. So at a very basic level with this book, you could be fooled into thinking that it might be about a woman who goes into the pool and refuses to come out, and it's not about that. But I think more complexly, what I was expecting and what you could be expected to expect is that this is about a woman who is refusing the patriarchal expectations, refusing to engage with what she is seen to be meant to do as a 50s housewife. And it's not really about that at all. I mean, a little bit. We talk about gender. We talk about how he wants his wife to make dinner. We talk about how she's given up her life. But this is really about a pretty boring marriage and doesn't have anything to do with gendered expectations, which is kind of what I expect in a book that I think is going to be about unhinged women. I mean, this wasn't. That is kind of on me, but really mostly on the summary and the publishers. Would you not think that 1950s housewife gets into the pool and refuses to come out? Would you not think that was going to have something to do with the patriarchy? Something to do with the setup of the nuclear family? Not really. Not meaningfully, at least. I'm also pissed off that Alyssa Nutting, author of Tampa, blurbed this book, and it is on the front cover. She made me think that this was going to be way different than what it was. It was just dry and dull. So because this was perhaps my most failed video I've ever done, I honestly did not like 3 out of 4 of these books, and I had pretty negative things to say throughout all of this. I think I'm going to read a 5th book for you because something needs to save this video. That is going to be Supper Club by Lara Williams. This, to my knowledge, is about a bunch of women being weird. And if it's not about that, I'm going to cut this out and pretend that I never said I was going to read it. Hello, I am back with great news. I have read Supper Club by Lara Williams, and I have absolutely loved it. We are ending on a high. This is a book about a group of women, and they start this supper club, this collective of women who are trying to take up space and devote themselves to their hunger by breaking into places and just like gorging themselves on food. That is kind of the premise behind the novel, but more than being about the supper club, this is about the lead character, Roberta, and her interpersonal relationships. I think if I had read this at a different time, I might have been disappointed that the focus wasn't entirely on this supper club, but as it was, I loved this because I was so endeared to these characters and I related to Roberta so much it was almost hard to look at. I'm going to get into everything that happens in this book, so if you don't want to hear that, skip this part. So this is going to be a little bit of an all over the place summary because this is one of those books that jumps between time and space really easily. It begins with Roberta and her very best friend Stevie interviewing the first woman that they are going to bring into the supper club. It's yet to happen. And in this interview with Lena, we understand a little bit about her. She tells this story. They always ask the women, what are you afraid of? And in response to that, she tells this story about how she had become obsessed working as a hotel clerk with the idea that her partner might be cheating on her with a sex worker. She became so obsessed with it, it took over her entire life. Like, she followed him around. She checked his phone constantly, and then it did actually end up happening. From this brief conversation at the beginning, we do get a little bit about Roberta and Stevie's characters. It's clear that Stevie is the outspoken one. She's the confident one. She's the artist. She's strong in her convictions. And Roberta is quite a bit more quiet than Stevie and clearly goes along with what Stevie's doing. Then we get more about Roberta as it goes back through her life. We learn a little bit about her childhood, how she grew up mostly in a house with just women, with her mom and her aunt. Her father had left them completely out of the blue, like said, I'm going to go pick up a movie from the store, and then never showed up again. And that was a good thing because he was an explosive, unpredictable asshole. Then it goes back to Roberta's university days, and for her, university was incredibly isolating. It did not live up to the dreams that she had had, the expectations of finding her own community or finding herself. She didn't get that at all. This is so relatable that it put me in like genuinely a bad place. Like, I feel like I had the exact same experience of university as Roberta did, and it was difficult to read, but also comforting to read in a way. Just the way that she wanted so badly to be like part of her roommate's friend group, but then would at the same time refuse all invitations. Like, this anxiety grappling with the isolation and never being able to fight either of them. We learn that she started cooking to fill the void and fill her time. Then it cuts to farther in the future where she had met Stevie, which was at their job. They were working together and they became pretty much instant best friends. For some reason, Stevie was hired as an intern under Roberta, which is like weird and didn't really make sense for the job, and it says that. And they are 2 years apart in age. Stevie's just 2 years younger than her. They moved in together almost immediately. This is like Roberta's person. They love each other so much. It's like very platonically romantic between the two of them. At one point thrown in here, there's this scene in a coffee shop that tells us both about Roberta and about what this book is commenting on. Roberta goes into this coffee shop, and first she enters, and everyone seems to have a menu that she doesn't have. And she sees that there is like an empty menu holder. So she's entering this situation where it feels like everyone else has information that she doesn't. And she's standing in line, and she is rehearsing what she's going to order, like obsessively, the way everyone fucking does. Like, you're telling me you don't do that? She gets to the front of the line, and in front of her, before she goes, there's a man, and he stands there, and he just starts humming and hawing for like minutes. He's completely unaware of the space that he's taking up and how selfish his behavior is. Like, there's a line behind him. He has not even for one moment considered what he wants. Then it gets into what should be a really boring and repetitive sequence of him talking to the cashier, the barista, and it's not, because it feels so frustrating but also so compelling, like almost like looking at a fucking car crash. He's like, what kind of teas do you have? She lists the teas, and he's like, are you sure you don't have any more herbal teas? And then he finally decides on a tea, and she opens the tea jar. Everyone like sighs a breath of fucking relief. She opens the tea jar, and there's no more of that tea. Then he makes her like pick apart all of the sandwiches to make sure there's no cucumbers on them, because he doesn't like cucumbers. It was a great way. It's not necessarily subtle, but it's also not entirely overt to tell us how Roberta moves through the world in relation to how men move through the world. So in living with Stevie, Roberta has realized that she loves cooking for people that she loves. One day they have two of Stevie's friends over, and that night Roberta comes to the realization she's been ambitionless up until this point in her life. She's almost 30. She thinks, what I need to do is start a supper club. So they become silly, artsy people with their little secret society. It's all very performative, and they can feel that it's kind of a performance. And their first rebellion, when they first rent out this restaurant that's closing down, and they like take off their shirts, they can feel how forced. They can feel the performance of this. And it's a little bit awkward, but it's also very wonderful. They eat until they are like absolutely gorged. Like, they eat until they're vomiting. They dance. They're loud. They take take up space, and it's like a wonderful transformative experience for the 4 or 5 women that are at the first one. Every once in a while, it will randomly cut in with an email from Roberta's father, who had abandoned her at like 7 years old and had no interest in her, never contacted her again. And he is sending her these long emails with these like ridiculously intimate details of his life, as if she is just an empty vessel for him to talk at. Like, she has no agency in this situation. She has not ever responded to him, and he just continues to email her just so he can like hear his own voice in email form, so he can read his own words. So while Stevie is Roberta's person, living with her and being her friend is not perfect. She has to sometimes fight for Stevie's affection. She has to be very attuned to her kind of volatile moods. And because she is so worried about being left behind, it's exhausting and it's so stressful. One day, Stevie comes home in a bad mood because this guy that she's been seeing had said that their supper club thing is not radical or rebellious, that it's actually like very basic and kind of silly. Like, they don't even really have any theory behind it, I guess, was his complaint. And she decides that they need to do something bigger. She decides that they need to start breaking into places, and that will really be taking up space instead of just renting out restaurants. So the first place they break into is a building at Roberta's old university, and this kind of puts her into a state. She's thinking about things that have happened in her past. We have seen a very graphic assault scene, and it has profoundly affected Roberta ever since it happened. This is largely affecting her being back in this university space because she's thinking about this boyfriend that she had when she was 19. He was like a 60-year-old professor who absolutely took advantage of her and her vulnerability and her absolute need for someone to look at her. She was so isolated. This guy like took her under his wing, and it was disgusting. Not something that she saw as disgusting at the time, but it was disgusting. His name is Arnold. So she's thinking about him, and it kind of ruins the night for her. And then the next morning, she ends up signing up for a dating website. And on this website, she runs into her old roommate, Adnan. The two of them have a really nice date. It's really nice catching up with him. It's nice getting his attention because she saw him as like a cool, popular boy when they were in university. And pretty quickly they move in together. She moves out of where she's living with Stevie. It feels a little bit out of the blue. I think it's supposed to be putting you in Stevie's shoes, how she feels about her best friend kind of all of a sudden abandoning her. And as you can feel is going to happen from the beginning, the two of them start falling out. This is incredibly stressful for Roberta because Stevie's not a great communicator, and neither is Roberta, but Stevie's emotions are so clear for everyone to see. Like, she's constantly rolling her eyes. She's not giving Roberta the time of day, and it's horrible. The next supper club ends up being a little bit of a disaster, and it's very tense the entire time. This time, they are breaking into a department store where one of the women works, Monica. But she doesn't know that they're doing that until her girlfriend finally tells her, "We're planning on breaking into your job." And Monica leaves Erin, her girlfriend. And so Erin shows up at this supper club and is already pissed drunk and like way too drunk. Then they can't get inside. They don't really know where the cameras are. They just have like a little bit of information about how the security works at this store, but it ends up being okay until Erin decides to go upstairs and an alarm rings and they all run out of there. They have completely trashed the place. Roberta wakes up to an empty apartment. She had told Adnan kind of half of the story of the supper club, and she knows that he does not approve of this at all. It's not as black and white as it sounds. Like, men don't understand this, but women do. Like, she has an aunt who she loves so much and has like really strong opinions about women's rights and feminism who doesn't get the supper club at all. But Adnan definitely falls into the same category there. She tells him that she's not just like hungover, she's sick because they had a little bit of bad food at the supper club, when in reality she had taken like a cocktail of drugs and had totally destroyed this department store. She ends up finding on his phone that he has found a news article, one of a few news articles that were written about this destruction, and he knows that she has lied about it. Around this time, Stevie calls her, which at this point is unexpected because Stevie and Roberta have pretty much completely fallen out with each other. And Stevie says, "You have to look at your phone." And Roberta sees that there has been an article written from the perspective of a woman at the supper club. One of them was actually an undercover journalist. Nothing actually comes of this because the journalist is exposing them, but she's protecting their identities. Roberta and Stevie get into a huge fight where Stevie tells her, your entire life has become Adnan. I was just a stand-in for him, and I feel like you used me. And they stop speaking, and supper club is over. Roberta's now going through life kind of as an empty shell. She's constantly in her head arguing with Stevie, and then also in her real life arguing with Adnan. Their relationship is not perfect. No relationship in this book is simplistic in any way. Then one of the women from the supper club, Emmeline, comes over and she tells Roberta that she has met Arnold, that fucking professor that Roberta had dated when she was 19, and Arnold wanted to talk to her. Then it cuts to Roberta waiting at a restaurant, but she's not waiting to meet up with Arnold. She is waiting for her father, who ends up completely showing her up. Then behind Adnan's back, she does end up meeting with Arnold, and Arnold just kind of sits there talking about himself the whole time. Then he over-explains feminism to her, and this just like flips a switch inside of her. And their food comes, and she has ordered a little soup because she wanted to like look dainty. She had been going through it in her head a lot, thinking about what to order and how Arnold would perceive it. And he has this like beautiful sandwich, and she's like, can I have that? And she just takes his sandwich and just starts eating it, and he just accepts it and he eats the soup. Then she just talks about whatever she wants to talk about, and whenever he cuts in, she'll say things like, oh, I don't think I'm interested in hearing about that. She just like plows over the whole conversation, actually like in her real life practices taking up space in an incredibly obnoxious and like cathartic way. That night she finally reaches out to Stevie, and they meet up and they kind of hash it out. In a lot of ways it's an argument, but it's also, she says, like two people who were in a relationship going over what went wrong and what went right. Stevie tells her that she's so passive that she avoids responsibility by saying things like, I'm the worst. She also says that she was not the one who abandoned Roberta, that Roberta abandoned her when she got with this guy. They decide to have one last supper club, and Roberta knows this is not going to go over well with her boyfriend, who has always hated the supper clubs. And when she tells him that this is going to happen, he completely leaves her. They get into a huge fight. Again, like I said, none of the relationships in this book can be boiled down to like one simple like trope, and none of the fights they have are simplistic either. It's not like there's a good guy and a bad guy. Like, people will be right about something in the moment, but fundamentally rooted in the wrong idea. It's very human, it's very complex, and it's kind of difficult to read about. The book doesn't make it super easy for you to decide what you think about their arguments, which is so real to genuine human arguments and human relationships. The women all get together for one last supper club where they totally destroy Roberta's apartment. They dance like they're never going to dance again, and it's kind of a healing moment, but it's also a little bit of an ambiguous ending. We're not sure where Roberta's life is going to go next. We're not sure what's happening with her relationship with Stevie. We know her and Adnan are done, and it's probably for the best. I think at the end here, that Roberta is growing, and it's kind of nice. It ends on a little recipe, which there have been a few of in this book. It doesn't really overdo it. At the beginning, I really liked what it was doing with the recipes. Then towards the middle, I was feeling like, okay, I'm a bit tired of this. Like, when a new chapter would start by saying like, sourdough bread is this, I would think, ooh, this is gonna drag. And it did, but then by the end I liked it again. The last recipe is for perpetual stew. It's not really a recipe. It's just talking about perpetual stew. Kind of like a Wikipedia article, but more like the long things, the long write-ups before a recipe online. That was what it was like. The last little bit is, traditionally the stew has spicy, savory, and sour notes. An element of sourness is absolutely necessary to cut through the rich and intense flavor. It is said to improve with age. And I just think that's a great end to a book. So I thought this book was fantastic, and that's largely because I loved the characters so much. I have never in my life felt like my mind worked in as similar as a way to anyone else's as it did to Roberta's. I related to her to a degree that was uncomfortable. It was like a mirror reflecting myself back, and I didn't want to look at it, but I also couldn't look away from it. There was a time where it said her name, because her name isn't used often, it's told in first person, and I thought, wait, why isn't that my name? She's relatable in the most normal, boring kind of ways that are articulated perfectly. Her whole experience with university, like, she's so desperate and so lonely, but she can't make choices to change that, even when they're handed to her, even when she has chance after chance. Like, her roommates will throw a party in their apartment and invite her to it. She gets dressed up in her room and then lies on her bed and can't go downstairs. Are you me? Her unquenchable desire for connection and her inability to do anything about it felt so true to life and so difficult, but so endearing as well. I also love the portrayal of Stevie as this kind of tortured artist type who has actually not really ever experienced adversity and is so acutely and distraughtly aware of that that it absolutely ruins her. Like, she knows that she doesn't really have anything to make art about because she's just had like a really privileged good life. I think her conviction in random theories that she has about people is so realistic. I mean, more so to like a 19-year-old and she's like 26, but I still loved it. And I liked that Stevie, for a lot of the book, can be seen through Roberta's eyes as someone who is hurting Roberta. But then at the end, we get more of her perspective of being hurt by Roberta. I also loved the way this book dealt with a trans character. It doesn't seem like it is doing it in a self-congratulatory way. This was in 2019, so I think has a little bit less social value than it does now, where this book would be marketed as like a queer book, even though it's not queer in like a very focused way. It's meaningful, but it's not like a huge part of the story, and our main character is a straight cis woman, but it introduces this trans woman who's part of the supper club, and it doesn't do it in a way where it's like, look, she's a trans woman. Like, it treats her very tenderly but very normally. It also doesn't do it in a way where it's like, she's a trans woman. For each woman in the supper club, we get a little story of their life. And we have seen stories like a woman who was punched in the face randomly when she was out for a jog. We've seen a story about a black woman who was walking with her white girlfriend. A man said a racial slur to her, and her white girlfriend started like fighting with the man, which caused the man to soak them in a carton of milk that he had in his shopping bag. And it caused this character to understand that her girlfriend was never going to understand what her life was like, and they broke up. With this character I'm talking about now, Sash, I really liked how it did her little story. It starts by introducing her using she, her pronouns, and then it does a thing that I think cis writers are really afraid of doing. I think cis writers are so incredibly cautious about writing trans characters that it's like othering, like even more othering. When it talks about Sash's life, it says Sash was a small boy. It uses he when Sash was using he, and then when it says that Sash had like found the Wikipedia page for transgender and then realized she was a girl, it very easily and seamlessly switches back to she, her pronouns. I think that that is often how trans people talk about themselves, and I think that in doing it so casually, so normally, it felt like a really good piece of representation, and I don't see that often. I don't want to make any generalizations, like this isn't true of everyone. I just think that the way this book did it in a way that made Sash feel like a very normal character was nice. Not really what I see often coming from cis writers. So the best thing about this book is that none of it is black and white. It leaves a lot up to your interpretation, and it doesn't fall into any like bioessentialism or any really black and white ideas about gender, which I think it easily could have, and it's stronger because it didn't. The relationships aren't black and white. Their dynamics aren't black and white. The way that men and women are portrayed are not black and white. It has a lot of depth and nuance, even though it's not ever like handing that to you on a platter. Like, you have to really think about what you feel about these characters and about their situations. I liked the way Roberta was doing this project that's all about taking up space and celebrating her hunger, and very much rooted in feminist ideology, though this book is not really like incredibly preachy about its feminist message, and Roberta cannot help as a straight woman in some way, as a straight woman who really struggles with relationships because of her entire life, which we get the story of. She can't help but rooting her own self-worth in her relationships with men. She can't help but abandoning her best friend as soon as someone is romantically interested in her. She is not immune to the values of the society that she lives in. She is not radical, and she doesn't think that she's radical. She really is just like a normal human woman trying to be a person and trying to figure out how she feels about everything and who she is. I think that when you read this book, you root for her. You're also frustrated with her. You are aware of her capacity for cruelness, and it's very difficult to find yourself articulated by and reflected in her character, and that makes it so compelling. I think I would have been really disappointed at the lack of like supper club content in this book if I hadn't loved Roberta as much as I did and loved reading about her as much as I did. When they're actually doing the supper club stuff, it's evocative, it's visceral, it's so detailed in a perfect way. This book is written beautifully, and it's also written really observationally. I liked how this did food, which is not something that I typically like in books. I think that it can come across as really pretentious when authors are writing about all these luxurious foods that nobody's ever fucking tried. This was not really just about food or food similes. It's not the what of what they're eating, it's more the how and the where and like the context of them eating, and that was far more interesting than books like A Fucking Certain Hunger, my least favorite book of all time. I would have liked to see a little bit more depth and a little bit more discussion of bodies and of weight gain. That is a part of this book, but it only really comes up a few times, and I think it needed to be focused on a little bit more. Otherwise, I just loved this book. Like I said, the recipe parts can be a little bit boring towards the middle, but overall, I think that they did add something. This is written just like perfectly. It's kind of like MFA writing, but not in a way that ever feels really purple or really pretentious. I think it's easy to read. The characters are just like the strength of this book. They're done so well. They're so well developed. There is a defined arc for each of them. It was wonderful, and I'm so glad that I read it. I gave this 5 stars on Goodreads, but 4.75 on Storygraph, and maybe I will think about this more, and that might go up. This, I can see having longevity in my mind. That's all I have to say. If you have any recommendations for more books about unhinged women, more looking for like ones that you haven't really heard people talk about, because I have read all the main ones except My Year of Rest and Relaxation, because I'm an Otessa Moshfegh hater and I'm just not going to read that book. If you have any recommendations outside of that, please leave them below. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.